Lolita the orca is finally on her way home. Well, maybe. Not quite. Well, we need to talk about it. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I am your host, Andrew Lewin. This is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. And today we've got a really good episode for you. Some good news to share here on this Friday afternoon or Friday day or Saturday or whenever you're listening to this. Really good news in the springtime is that Lolita the orca, who has been a resident for multiple decades at the Miami Seaquarium, is getting released. Maybe. There's a good possibility. Things are lining up to make sure that she's released. So the first thing is there are new owners at the Miami Seaquarium called the Dolphin Project. These owners want to see Lolita released back into the Northwest or Northeast Pacific waters or Northwest United States in the Salish Sea, where she was caught back in the 1970s. Now, back in the 1970s, there were 62 animals that were taken for captivity. 12 of them died, 50 survived. She was one of those 50. Now, she was taken from what we think is her mother, who was known as L25. She had a mother, and the mother, Ocean Sun, and the mother is still alive. So it would be nice. It would be very sort of like a great ending to a movie to see, Tokite, which is Lolita's real name. It's the Lumi English name, I guess. I can't pronounce the Lumi name for it. Lumi is the indigenous people that want to see her back. The Lumi people have a very big connection, a very strong connection with the orca population. From my understanding is the Lumi people who pass on and go into sort of the spirit world, their spirit is taken in by the orcas, and so they have a strong connection as they believe the orcas become their ancestors. And so that is a very important part of this story, because the Lumi people have been working with a lot of organizations as well as their own to get Toki back into the Northwest Pacific. And so we've been wanting this to happen ever since she was caught. And so now we're starting to see things align. So let's get back to what's been aligned. First thing that's aligned, new owners, they want to release the orca back into captivity or back into the wild. Great. It'll be a sanctuary. It'll be wonderful. We'll talk about the sanctuary and what is involved in that release. Now, how do you get an animal that's located in the Southeast US to the Northwest US? It's going to take a lot of money. It's going to take a lot of air power, an airplane of some sort, and it's going to take probably millions of dollars. And so they have a backer. The Jim Irsay, who is the NFL owner of the Indianapolis Colts, is ready to put up the funds, and if not, has already donated the funds to get Toki home. So we have two things that are lined up, which is absolutely wonderful. And there are people, the Lumi people, as well as other organizations, who have started to select sanctuary sites for the Whale Seaside Sanctuary that will go into the Pacific Northwest. Now, it sounds all great, and it's wonderful. I love the fact that there's a potential for actually to have an orca be released from captivity. We haven't seen that since the early 2000s when Keiko from the movie Free Willy, if you remember correctly, Keiko was a real orca that was taken from, I believe it was an aquarium or a theme park in Mexico and maybe in San Diego, rehabilitated in an aquarium in, I believe it was Oregon, and then it was released into a seaside sanctuary off the coast of Iceland. It actually survived there for a number of years before it passed on. And we'll talk a little bit about that because it has something to do with the release that I think is pretty important, that we need to consider some of the challenges that need to be considered. Now let's just talk about, the whales that are there. Like we know, well, first let's talk about Toki and the life that she's had. She has been in captivity for over 5 decades. She has been by herself for over 4 decades. Not the ideal conditions. She has been in a small, shallow tank where she has been fed for all of her life, for those last 5.5 decades or 5 or more decades. And there's some serious things that have been going on with her in terms of, you think about the sensitivity, the emotional sensitivity and the psychology of an orca that we really saw in Blackfish, the documentary. We really understood that these animals can be very sensitive. They can, almost go, not insane, but they can go a little berserk when they're by themselves in a tank, a shallow tank, when normally in the wild they would be traveling for thousands of kilometers per day potentially, feeding, hunting. They are the apex predator in the ocean. Having an animal by itself that's normally or surrounded by other orcas, and highly intelligent, highly sensitive, to be by itself in a small, shallow tank with very little to do for that amount of time can be devastating and can affect how this animal is going to react being in the wild. Now, with that said, there are a lot of people saying it's better to die in the wild for anything that she will undergo in the wild. We'll talk about that in a second. Some of the challenges that orcas face in the wild, but it's better to die in the wild than it is to die in a tank, a shallow tank by themselves. So I get that. I truly get that. And when we look at an orca in captivity, the whole premise, the whole focus is the health of the orca. Right? It's in the what's best for the orca. So right now, there are a lot of things are aligning in actually releasing it. There are sites that are being chosen to release it, and this is a big thing. Now let's get back to Keiko, because it's really important to find out, has there been a precedent set to release an orca? And everybody says, well, Keiko was an orca that was released in Iceland along the coast. It was fairly successful in that it lived in the ocean for a number of years. I believe it was either 2 to 4 years. I did a whole episode with Dr. Naomi Rose, who recounted the story. I'll put a link in the show notes or in the description below if you're watching this on YouTube, and you can listen to that episode. Great episode on the whole sort of release of it that will go into great detail. The orca was never really released. It was stayed in sea pens for most of its life. It never really reintegrated with local orca populations, and it never really fed on its own. And so it needed constant attention. It needed constant human contact in terms of feeding. But it did live a life, or a number of years outside of captivity. So you can say, some people say it wasn't successful because she eventually died, or the Keiko eventually died. But then you can also say, well, it kind of was successful because that animal was able to live out its life without having any problems, without being in captivity, without being lonely, without having the devastations of being in captivity, having to, perform for anyone, and just live its life in the wild as it was meant to be. Now, let's talk about this Lolita, the Toki. Toki being released back into the Salish Sea, where its home is, where she was originally taken, has never been done before. There's never been an orca that has been reintegrated back into a population or into waters where it was once living. And it's been a long time. It's been over 55 years. So that is a problem in itself. Scientists and conservation, we don't know if that pod, if Ocean Sun, its potential mother, will actually accept it back into the pod. We don't know if it'll be able to feed on its own. We don't know if it'll actually go outside of the pen that will probably be set up initially to be able to be released. In the article that I found that I'll link in the show notes in the description, they mentioned that, hey, it's going to be released, it's going to live a life on its own, it'll be able to hunt, Chinook salmon and all this kind of stuff. We don't know if it's going to be able to do that on its own, right? You've got to remember it's been in captivity and been fed for over 5 decades. That is something that, you may not be able to relearn in its lifetime. We don't know that if it'll survive. We don't know how long it's going to survive in the wild. We don't know what's going to happen to it. We're hoping for the best, but there are challenges in, one, flying the animal over, right? That whole transition, that whole transit process, which there are great scientists, great veterinarians that are able to do that. I'm not denying that, and I'm not against it. I'm actually for this release, to be honest. But there are challenges, and it's something that we have to consider. We have to make sure that all the pieces are in the right place. And just because we have the money for it, we have the will to, the owner's ready to release it, is a great first couple of steps, but there's a lot of things that need to happen. And we also have to realize that the animal is pretty old. And so is it really worth transferring? There are a lot of possibilities that it could die in the transfer. It may not be as healthy. There's been reports in the past that the previous owners of the Miami Sea Aquarium were making sure that it was able to, it was kept performing, but it was being fed rotten fish. The water quality wasn't that great. It was constantly sick and so forth. So we don't know what the health of this animal was in. We don't know if it'll require rehabilitation, just like Keiko was required rehabilitation. With Keiko, scientists noticed that, and vets noticed that they didn't have a lot of muscle because it wasn't swimming anywhere. So it almost had to go through a bit of a physical fitness program to get the muscle back so that it's constantly able to swim. And in Oregon, they did that, and then when they were able to release Keiko successfully into the ocean. So now, now we're looking at the specifics here, and this is something that we have to watch out for. After in the 1970s, the southern resident orca population, the population that was hit biggest by the capture and lost about 62 individuals during that capture, they never really recouped in numbers. You got to remember that orcas are a slow growing species. They can live up to 80, maybe even more in the wild. And so they're not going to be, they deliver maybe, each mother delivers maybe one calf a year, maybe two. I think it's just one, but maybe two. I'm not an expert, but they don't reproduce like some fish reproduce. They reproduce thousands or things like that. They're a slow growing species, meaning that it takes a while for populations to recover to get to the population numbers that they're at, which was like plus 150. That's one thing to worry about. The population right now is an endangered population. It's at 73 individuals, as we know right now. They also face three major challenges that have also impeded their growth, that population growth. One of the challenges is the lack of Chinook salmon. There's not much salmon around. This southern resident population is very picky in its eating. It's like a small child that doesn't want to eat its vegetables. It only wants to eat Chinook salmon. And so it will only eat Chinook salmon. And as opposed from transient whales, not the resident, but the transient whales will eat anything. They'll eat marine mammals, they'll eat other whales, they'll eat all these different fish, crustaceans, whatever they can sink their teeth into. These resident populations, Chinook salmon. Chinook salmons have been cut off from their reproductive rivers that they go into by dams and blockades, and so that's been a big problem. It's an issue in and of itself to worry about. Then there's been marine pollution. As the Salish Sea borders on a lot of communities, a lot of cities, all that pollution that goes into the harbor, into Puget Sound, into the Salish Sea can affect the animals, right? Plastic pollution can affect the animals. We've talked about it multiple times on this podcast. I'm not going to go into complete detail, but it's something that, it's a worry. It's definitely a worry. Underwater noise is another detail that can affect any kind of marine mammal, including orcas. So orcas communicate through noises, clicks and noises and sounds. It's actually quite beautiful. They're known for their acoustics. They're known for their singing, and even scientists will track them using acoustic data or using acoustic instrumentation. But when you use acoustics, when you start using your voice, you need to hear. And with a lot of boats in the area, whether it be ecotourism boats like whale watching boats or shipping boats, just regular recreational vehicles, boats, you may not be able to hear, so you may not be able to communicate as efficiently, and you may not be able to feed as well. So those are the three major challenges that have prevented the animals from increasing in population just on a regular basis. Add on, in addition to that, is taking out their population size, by capturing 62 right off the bat. That's a big problem. Putting Toki back into the ocean where there's lack of food in general, marine pollution, and underwater noise that can affect its communication with its original pod can definitely affect, the sort of rewilding of Toki. These are definitely some of the challenges. The other challenges is, she will be released into a sanctuary that will probably be like a big pen. It'll be like a big net that goes around, maybe in a cove or in a bay. There will be, there won't be any orcas that'll be permitted to go through unless allowed to go through, or other marine mammals or anything like that. So that's one of the things that's going to be. She's going to be put into a sanctuary. She will have to feed at some point. And when I talk to other people about this, about the whale seaside sanctuaries, a lot of the times there is an understanding that Toki might have to eat through being hand fed by humans for a long time. Not doing tricks, but just getting fed, because she probably forgot how to hunt. She probably doesn't know how to hunt. She doesn't need to hunt for food in captivity because they give it to her, right? They give the food to her. So she lost that ability to hunt. So will she be able to get it back? She might be. She might be able to hunt. She might not be. So, I think the people who release her have to be prepared to continue the care that is required, as it would be in captivity, to feed Toki and to make sure that she's healthy, make sure that the vets are looking after her and so forth. So it's going to require some funding, not only to transport her over there, but also continued funding to make sure that she's eating and make sure that she's healthy. She may not reunite with Ocean Sun, her mother. The mother may not accept her. The pod may not accept her. However, we might see a wonderful situation where she is accepted into the pod and she is taught how to live, how to hunt all over again. We might see a reuniting. That's the hope. That's what we're hoping for. That's the story. Like, imagine the videos, being recorded and being put on social media like TikTok and Instagram and all that, Facebook, to watch, a mother and be reunited with her daughter after 50 years, over 50 years of being separated. I'm kind of getting emotional just thinking about it. That's what we're hoping for, but it may not happen. We have to be prepared that may not happen. The one thing we have to realize too, I mentioned it earlier, is it's never been done before. Releasing an orca back into its home waters, where it originated from, has never been done before. And that could be dangerous for, that could be good for, we don't know. It's a big mystery. There are whale seaside sanctuaries that have been chosen on the east coast of Canada in Nova Scotia. She could go there. That might be the best place for her. Or where everybody wants, the Lumi people, as well as other scientists and advocates and conservationists, want her to go back home. So that might be an option too, but it's never been done before. So there are a lot of questions that surround that, and probably concerns. You can't just plop an apex predator into an area that she hasn't been in over 5 decades and expect everything to be perfect. We don't know. These animals can be very dangerous. They can be very protective. And if they don't know who that animal is, or they don't recognize that animal, there could be consequences. And there's nothing you can do about it. So with all of this, there is a lot of hope, but there are also a lot of questions that need to be answered. And I don't want people to just blindly say, hey, we have the money, we have the will, the owners are ready to release her, let's put her back in, and let's just hope for the best. There's still a lot of questions. The concern is still, and the focus is still on Toki to make sure that she is healthy. But I want to know what you think. Do you think that she should be released? Do you think that we should take our time to release her, or that she's old enough where we need to release her as soon as possible? I'd love to hear what you think. Put it in the comments below if you're watching this on YouTube. And if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or your favorite podcast app, and you want to get in touch with me, you can go ahead and do that by DMing me on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. That's at How to Protect the Ocean, all one word. Or you can go to speakupforblue.com/contact, fill out the form that goes right to my email. I'd love to hear your opinion on this, because that's what this is all about. I start the conversation, you continue it, and we have a great time. And hopefully at one point we can protect the ocean. So thank you so much for listening to this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.